Ralph Silva's been paying close attention to the banks. He's director of the Silva Research Network. Great to see you, Silva. Ralph, let's first of all talk about Barack Obama, these comments. He wants a worldwide levy on banks. Is that really doable?
Right, it's the witch hunt. I call it the witch hunt because it is really a witch hunt. They're going after bonuses on the anticipation that if you tax the banks, they will stop paying bonuses. That is absolutely not the case.
It's quite the reverse. They'll give all the money to in the shape of bonuses rather than pay the tax.
That's exactly the point. And also what we're doing is we're taking money out of the banking industry in a period of time where we need the banks to start giving money out to the public, and they're not doing that. And what we end up doing is making their ability to do that even less. So it's a really bad idea right now.
JP Morgan out with numbers later on today. You know, how's the earnings season going to pan out for these, and what is JP Morgan Chase going to tell us which we can apply to the others?
Yeah, I think it's we should not look at JP Morgan and say the rest of the industry is going to be the same. JP Morgan's doing extremely well. Most of the investment banking business is going in their direction, so they've almost tripled their revenues on that side. But this is another interesting point, is that we haven't heard the earnings report, yet Obama's already come out and said they're going to tax them. He's taxing the banks without actually knowing what position they're in, which is yet another question as to why is he doing this at this time.
Right, but a lot of competition out there at the moment, and well, analysts beginning to raise the red flag, lower some of the estimates for European investment banks in particular. Why so? Is it just down to perhaps looking ahead to withdrawal of stimuli, this witch hunt on bonuses, as you put it, as well?
A couple of factors here. The first factor, and probably the most important one, is that the investment banking customer base, the big businesses, have gravitated to the banks that are not associated with the governments. So in Europe, HSBC, BNP, Barclays are doing very well. And the have-nots, the banks that are associated with government, RBS and Lloyds, are getting almost no business. The analysts are changing their opinions on the banks that are associated with the governments because they're not doing very well.
Okay, so it's what we talked about a year ago, more or less, a tale of two banking sectors now.
Exactly, the haves and the have-nots. If you're an investor, look at the banks that are not associated with the governments because the customers have a preference for them, and ultimately it's the customers that are going to take us out of recovery.
Right. What about you know, retaining talent or top talent here? Now that's going to be key for some of these, particularly the RBSs and the Lloyds of the world. How do they do it with the government on their back not to give them bonuses?
They're going to pay the bonuses. They have to pay the bonuses. The assumption that the government makes that is erroneous is the fact that they're paying these bonuses arbitrarily. They are, in fact, on minimum wage for a trader, for an investment banker. They will continue to get this money. They're just going to have to, the banks are going to have to reach into their own capital reserves and give it back to the government.
Okay, so you know, where do we go? What does it look like in, let's say, 6 months from now for the European banking industry in particular? We'll talk about the US one in a second.
That's a really good question. In 6 months, what we're going to see is we're going to see 3 or 4 very big banks, the HSBCs, BNPs. They're going to be doing very, very well. The rest of it, we're going to move downstream. We're going to go to smaller to medium-sized banks. Why? Their cost bases seem to be lower at this time, and the customer bases seem to be going to them. So we're going to have 2 areas, very large banks and a whole bunch of smaller ones.
Okay, in the US, same question?
A little bit different. In the US, we're going to see all the banks suffer, all the big banks that are going to be taxed on this. So we're going to see everything's going to come down. And what we're going to see is foreign entrants into the US to try to take advantage of this. It's going to be the HSBCs and the BNPs that are going to go in and try to take some market share away from the American banks. And I think they're going to be successful doing it.
Yeah, I had our Bloomberg columnist Matthew Lynn in last Friday, and he was talking about, well, this is the only industry where you don't get new entrants. And he was saying, well, for God's sake, in airlines, and you name it, on the high street, etc., you get new entrants, which keeps things fresh, keeps competition alive. But you don't get it with banks.
No, and it's going to be near impossible to do that for 2 reasons. First of all, the cost of actually setting up just the technology of a bank is in the hundreds of millions. And secondly, regulations are so strict and are going to get stricter.
And they favor the incumbent, not the new entrant.
Absolutely. And they have to, because you have to show some credibility and you have to show some backing, some actual experience in doing banking before you can get a license. And you can't do that from scratch.
Yeah, and well, on top of that, you know, you have, in the case of, let's say, Virgin Money taking over a very small institute there, got Tesco waiting in the wings. Don't know what's going to happen there. Northern Rock people mentioned.
Sure.
That's another way of doing it, isn't it?
Exactly, and that's if we're going to see any new entrants. They're going to be brand changes instead of actual new entrants. They're going to be old banks with new brands on them, and the brands are just going to be bought by these big organizations. But essentially, the same people doing the banking.
Commercial consumer banks versus investment banks, where would you be?
I would be in investment banks right now because I think that's.
But then within those, of course, you have to be looking at who haves and the have-nots.
Exactly. Investment banking operations are very important for the banks that are not associated with the governments. I'd be looking for that as an investment opportunity.
Ralph, top pick?
Probably HSBC right now.
Great. Thanks a lot for that.
Thank you.
Ralph Silva there from the Silva Research Network.